All right, as the world marks Workers' Day, and we are, of course, zooming in now to the relevance of the unions. I mean, some have said that the pandemic has also made things somewhat different. The economic state that the globe finds itself in has also added pressure to the work that the unions have to do. So do they even have any relevance at all, and how do they maneuver these perilous times? Let's speak now to Nina Benjamin, who is a project leader at Gender Equality Program, Terry Bell, a labor analyst, and Professor Sipho Seepe is a political analyst and no stranger to the show. Thank you so much to you all for your time. I'll begin with you, Prof. Events that were really intense unfolded outside Rustenburg today in the Northwest. I wonder, what are your thoughts on what happened?
Well, one could say this has been long coming. The sense that the workers are being betrayed and are always given promises and are always placated has been something that somehow the various unions have been actually raising. And they've actually found that the president has been more good on promises but less on delivery. And they've also seen the ANC veer more towards responding to concerns of a big capital than their concerns. And this comes at a time when you find that there's a heightened or the acceleration of unemployment in our country. And every time there's talk, it is more about placating than coming up with a solution. And they also see that the president has spent more time on talking about corruption as if it will address their concerns. And even then, they also see that the addressing of corruption has also been almost not consistent. So they are actually saying this president, who was booed by ordinary citizens during the campaign for elections last year, is now being booed by the people that he's supposed to be saying, I represent you. But to be fair to him, the president has always been consistent in his pro-capital stance. So this does not come as a surprise. It was simply a matter of time before the workers voiced their own frustration. And people like Terry Bell had actually written as far back as when Ramaphosa was actually appointed the president to say the workers will rule the day that they supported certain policies. And there are issues that the ANC had committed itself that would have made a lot of workers better, but that has not happened. And they don't hear any plan other than the campaigning for president of the ANC and the workers being second fiddle. But one should also understand that the relationship between the ANC and COSATU has been almost symbiotic. There was no way that you could separate. Workers saw national oppression as their issue, but they also saw class oppression. They saw the need to deal with it. So they saw in the ANC a party that they can rely on. But right now, they have actually expressed themselves to say, this party is no longer representing the interests of the workers.
And I mean, listening to what you're saying then, Prof, it sounds like you're saying that the leaders have been quite tone deaf for quite some time now.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a number of failures. One, if you are a union leader, you must have your ear and eyes on the ground. So something like this does not come out of the blue. When it comes out of the blue, it means you are disconnected with the people that you claim to represent. Secondly, at the level of government, there's something called common sense and national intelligence, which has also been missing. So what we have here is dysfunctionality at a number of levels. But most importantly, one is not saying that we should also rely on intelligence. What we are saying is that if you say you are a government of the people, you will then be able to hear the people. You will then be able to see the people. But if you don't hear the people and you don't see them, then you are going to face this level of embarrassment.
And Mr. Bell, I'd like to come to you, and before you can even speak, I'd like to read something that you said, which when events were happening in the Northwest today, I couldn't help but think about the opening words of that op-ed that you've written recently. You say, these are perilous times for trade unions, not just in South Africa, but globally. And as May Day dawns, once favored slogans such as Phambili Basebenzi, forward with the workers, should perhaps more appropriately give way this year to the international radio distress signal, Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. Are we at crisis point?
Well, the point is here that we still have unions fighting the battles of the 20th century when we've moved into the 21st. As regards, and Professor Sipho is completely correct, I don't know who advised or who decided that President Cyril Ramaphosa should be the main May Day speaker in Rustenburg, especially at this time. Here we have a major strike, and this is in the Platinum Belt, an area where, let us not forget, 10 years ago, almost, well, in August the 16th, it will be 10 years, Marikana, in which, embarrassingly, the president was involved because of emails, etc. And nothing has had, there's a lot of resentment in that area about the way that whole matter was handled and the fact that there'd been no prosecution since then. So, it would have been better to send someone like Gwede Mantashe, who was also a former General Secretary of NUM, for example, because what you had there was both NUM and AMCU who were involved in the Sibanye strike. And it's a long strike and it's quite a bitter strike. So the point is, in an area like that, I just cannot understand it, whether it was insensitive, it was certainly foolhardy, I think, maybe even arrogant. But whatever, it was a mistake. That's getting to that. The other thing is that, of course, unions are declining across the board, and that's right around the world, because capital has moved to the area of being able to fragment workers. And part of this whole business of the so-called xenophobia, dudula, whatever, is fragmenting workers. It's splitting one worker from another, irrespective of where they were born. And we also split them by having the gig economy, having part-time work, parlous work, people not knowing whether they have, you can be employed for 1 hour in a week and you classify as employed. If you count those people together with those who are stopped looking for work, etc., the extended definition, I would argue that it is very easy to prove that if you look at those as unemployed as well, we have more than half the potential workforce of this country is actually unemployed or grossly underemployed. It's a terrible and a dangerous situation. And where are the workers? We're still fighting the battles of workers who are permanently employed, fighting for better wages and conditions, correct. But what we should be looking at, especially now where we have machine learning coming in at an incredible pace, work has changed and is changing very rapidly. We have automation coming in, all driven by artificial intelligence, which in many ways, if you look at it from one point of view, is actually making the bulk of humanity, and that is the working class, redundant. So unions have to start looking at a new way, what the ILO, the International Labour Organization, calls revitalization. Unions should not adapt to the present circumstances and retreat into their old, basically lagers of public sector and the big industries such as mining and whatnot, just to protect the workers that are already employed. There's a new way that has to be built. How it's built, I don't know. It's not yet open, not yet clear. But something new has to come out of this, because workers will have to be organized, otherwise they're going to continue being exploited. There's a need for not unions in the traditional sense, certainly, but certainly organized labor is still an essential element within this economic system.
I'll come back to what organized workers look like, because this has been the theme throughout the day, that workers must really be organized in such a way that they avoid being exploited. And I'm going to come back to you to get a sense of what that looks like. But I'll come to you now, Ms. Benjamin, because some of the individuals that I was listening to talking throughout the May Day celebrations, particularly in the Northwest, were women who are talking about how difficult things have been for them. And you look at the fact that the pandemic has also exposed them to even greater difficulty. Would you say that this particular issue has been taken into account during bargaining structures?
Good evening. I think that as we celebrate May Day this year, we're doing it with the pandemic still continuing. And I suppose two of the key issues for women is just the level, firstly, of discrimination that continues in the workplace. There's also just the issue of care work and what's happening around that. And then particularly there's the issues of the levels of violence that continue. And so I think that with the pandemic, these issues have been highlighted. And it's going to be key that as we, certainly in the bargaining processes that go forward now, there's many challenges now. There's retrenchment. There's, workers who are dealing with wage cuts. But in this context, we cannot leave behind the levels of discrimination that women are faced with in the workplace. And so this is going to be an important time now where during the pandemic, we've seen the importance of care work. We've all experienced it. We've all realized that this kind of work is essential, that we continue to maintain that we keep our eye on that. I think the second thing that's really been exposed is that now the kinds of levels of violence that women experience on their way to work, in the workplace itself, cannot be ignored. We've got international instruments like Convention 190 that the South African government has ratified now, and it's now our time to build on that. So I think that, with the pandemic, it opened our eyes, I think, even more to what are the specific issues that need to be dealt with. And I think that May Day reminds us that these are the issues that need to be put on the agenda.
So for you, would it then be important to have gender equity bargaining? Would that be able to assist at all?
I think that bargaining has always been about dealing and representing workers and dealing with forms of discrimination in the workplace. Now, there's been ongoing issues of discrimination. And we know, for example, the wage gap that exists between women and men. We also know the kind of work that women are finding themselves in, more and more different kinds of forms of precarious work where they feel they don't have the right to be able to voice what their conditions are. Even though the laws are there and the laws are there to protect women, there is the need for the union to play an essential role in being able to say, we are taking up these issues, and in this round of bargaining that are happening now, it's going to be key to put the issue of discrimination, of the care work issue, the issues of violence firmly on that bargaining agenda.
And Prof, you're right about the betrayal of workers having been something that is historic. And I'm interested in what you write. You say that the seeming collapse or emasculation of the labor movement in the country mirrors that experienced by former liberation movements. The reasons are not hard to find. What did you find are these reasons?
Well, first of all, within the liberation movement and within the workers, we have seen capital doing the old strategy. One is to fragment and disunite either the ANC as well as the workers. And they do that by simply co-opting some of those members into the boards. And as I say in the article, when the party bosses co-opt people who are union leaders, they don't co-opt them to advance any revolution. They actually advance them to frustrate it. And Terry brought in the issue of Marikana. If you look at Ramaphosa's role there, he was co-opted into the board of the mining bosses. And the only activity and action that people saw was more in defense of capital than in the defense of workers. And if you went, like some of us did, to Marikana, to look at the conditions that the workers were living in, you would actually be so shocked that these are the conditions where a leader of unions should have understood and should have been a champion. And if you talk to the workers there, they will tell you that, no, he added no value. So that's number one. We also saw members of the ANC working at Lutuli House, going on months after months without being paid and being ignored. And you're talking about somebody who was able to amass millions of money for his own campaign. And you would have thought that you would say, guys, those of you who are my benefactors, those who are willing to give money to me, I've got a crisis in my own organization, the organization that should rule. Can you just not spare a little so that we can take them out of this deepening poverty, these conditions? It did not happen. So if you cannot even support the people who support your own political office, why should ordinary workers start actually believing in you? So the co-option and also the behavior of the president has not helped. When he addressed the big capital, he even went to tell them that the government does not create jobs. Well, to a certain extent, we expect the jobs to be created somewhere. But there's an element of insensitivity, especially when you have the SOEs that are crumbling, that used to employ a lot of people. So the conversation that the president should have had, or the ANC, is not happening. I mean, what Terry is talking about is that maybe we should have had a discussion about the nature of the economy that we have, so that we do not continue to fail on something that no longer exists. In the same way that I said that about education, that it makes no sense about educating young people for the economy that no longer exists. That's how our young people graduate from universities to unemployment. But the point is that the conversation we should be having is not happening. But what we have, you find the most retrogressive pronouncements coming from the party that is supposed to be leading the people. So, but like people say, you can fool some people all the time, but you cannot fool people all the time. And what workers are saying is, we have given you a number of chances, but we don't see anything. And for us to come to a rally, and especially in Rustenburg, when there are these issues, the president that always promised that he is going to see the widows of Marikana, he still has not done that. So, as Terry put it, it's either insensitivity or arrogance. But whichever way it is, it has expressed itself in the people saying, you are no longer the person that we want to back. And it is embarrassing when you are a president of the country. Yes, the president could have thought about it, but it means also he is misadvised. Or yes, the people who are advising him are not on the ground. But there's a total failure in terms of their ears on the ground, and especially for people that you say, I used to lead you, I understand your issues. Suddenly, you get into a position, you no longer understand their issues.
And interestingly enough, Prof, you talk about that. I mean, when he was addressing them right there on the ground, one of them even came out to say, Usjigele. And he was even saying, no, I haven't. So definitely, as you say. But one thing that stands out as you talk is that, Mr. Bell, one of the things, and that is clear, it takes me back to what the General Secretary of COSATU said, Begin Chalinchali, that the trade unions of yesterday cannot continue into the future. They somewhat need to renew. And when he spoke about organizational renewal, I couldn't help but think of the ANC, which is currently trying to do that. So what does that renewal then look like in order for these unions to be able then to deal with the issues of the workers? Because even today, we heard EFF leader Julius Malema saying that they've abandoned the struggle of the workers by their cozy relationship with the ANC.
Well, the one thing, of course, is Julius Malema is now talking about setting up another union. And I think the last thing we need, quite honestly, in this country is yet another politically aligned union. The best thing the unions could do, and I've argued this now for the 30 years, that extricate themselves from the political parties. The unions have a particular view. In 1996, the combined union movement, and there were the three federations at the time, COSATU, FEDUSA and NACTU. And they put forward a macroeconomic document which was hardly revolutionary, but quite radical, social democratic, which put forward the idea that you can have redistribution. In other words, get rid also of, quite honestly, the spatial development, the geography of apartheid and all that sort of thing. Get out there and redistribute, and that will lead to growth. Instead, business came out with their own policy, which was straight down the line, growth, privatize everything. And then came GEAR, the government's policy, growth, employment and redistribution, which was basically another version, and a fairly shallow version too, of the what's called neoliberalism, which was put growth first. Let us make rich people richer so the richness will trickle down. It's never worked anywhere in the world. It certainly wasn't going to work here in what was already developing into the world's most unequal country, for the very simple reason that we have had 40 years of the most horrendous social engineering, which deliberately divided people on linguistic basis, North Sotho from South Sotho from Tswana, etc. They divided on a racial basis, they divided on an economic basis, and they were corrupt. And instead of getting in there and changing everything, they didn't. The unions were prepared to do that, put it forward, but when the government decided to not listen to them and to take this gear policy forward, the unions fell into line. And from 1996, you have a number of unions and union leaders, some of whom have become, incidentally, billionaires, who then moved in and set up investment companies. So you have trade unions becoming part of the establishment of exploiting workers. It's a complete contradiction. This has got to be changed. How it's changed, I think we need a great endeavor, perhaps, I don't know, Lekgotla or whatever, of all the unions, everyone to come together and say, look, we have made a mess of this thing. Which way forward? And the way forward is certainly not the way we've been going in the last 20, 30 years.
And Ms. Benjamin, I'm not sure if you are still on the line. One of the things that some are calling for is that, there needs to be an inclusive conversation, and I'm told that Ms. Benjamin, unfortunately, her line has dropped. But I'll come to you then, Prof. Seepe, because one of the things that we saw today was a very frustrated Zingiswa Losi who was speaking to the president, talking about the issues of state capture, the issues of, the collective bargaining agreement that hasn't been respected. She spoke about how the workers are hungry, they're angry, they're on strike, they demand urgent action. But when I read your piece, you call it schizophrenia. It was not in context with today. You say that it's nothing new that COSATU is upset. So I suppose you are taking what she said today, her frustrations, with a pinch of salt.
Yeah, take a simple, I was referring to the January 8th statement presentation, where she went around to saying they crisscrossed the province and workers were talking about they're not being paid. And which, of course, it's right for any leader to raise those issues. But she chose not to remind the president that the ANC, the leader of the Tripartite Alliance, are actually failing to even pay your own workers. So how can the workers trust you? So you found that she was almost causing up to the event, rather than seem to say the workers of the ANC are also workers, the same workers as those that she felt they were underpaid and not paid in the province. But when you choose to ignore that, especially when there's been a lot of strident calls, frustration, members of the ANC wanting to go to court, members of the ANC even picketing Luthuli House, and you suddenly forget that when you talk about unpaid workers. That actually shows a certain degree, a very interesting bout of amnesia, and which we should not take. It's just opportunism. And we've also seen, like I say, the very same president saying, which something that the COSATU themselves went to distance it from him, when he said the government does not create jobs. Both the SSCP and the ANC jumped. So these are things that you say and you are consistent. So if you're not consistent, nobody is going to take you seriously. But the point is that, as Terry put it, when you're also a member of the NEC of the ANC, you're also bound to want to be sympathetic to the political organization. That's why the two, you're going to have a serious problem. In the same way that Terry put it, that if you start having unions, having investment companies make money through profit. And profit means that there's exploitation. So you have also the people who are supposed to be against exploitation of workers exploiting them somewhere else. It's the same as when you have a priest in the military, because you find on both sides they have priests praying that God must save these ones. The other priest that side is also praying the same thing. So what you have here is lack of consensus, is opportunism. It's crazy. But what is very clear for workers is that first, the special arrangement of apartheid has not changed. Two, the land that they also joined in the National Democratic Revolution has not, the patterns have not changed. Three, that their condition and unemployment has increased. So they're saying what counts is reality. It is not lofty promises, ideas about speed trains that will travel with the speed of light from one place to another. They're simply saying we are hungry. And to give them 350, I mean, let anybody try to see how you feed a family of 4 with only 350 per month.
Now, Mr. Bell, in light of that and what you said, even earlier on, you say that, we do not need another union that is politically affiliated. We are seeing, of course, the mushrooming of some, in the labor movement who are saying that they don't want to be politically aligned. They want to take the interests of the workers at heart. We spoke about this a little earlier on in the conversation, that the workers must unite. They must organize themselves in such a way that their issues are not lost. What does that organizing and uniting of the workers look like?
What it looks like is coming together and deciding on a basic policy. We have a fantastic policy in our Bill of Rights in South Africa. So we say, right, this is what we stand for. But we are organizing workers on the basis of them being workers. Unions are, in fact, the defensive army of the working class. They have all sorts of interests, different religions, different beliefs, etc. And then they can get together and debate, educate themselves, argue about different points of view, and then decide who they will support politically. Because they can then put the pressure, because they actually have the pressure, they have the organization, and they should actually have the numbers as well. So the point is that political parties, or those who are within our system, political system, unless we change it, but within our present system, they can then put the pressure on and say, right, we'll support you, but only if you do that. And that they can do. We don't at the moment, of course, have recallability of our MPs, so our democracy extends to going once every 5 years and putting a cross on a piece of paper for a party. Unfortunately, we should also be able to recall those we don't agree with. But if the unions, and when I say unions, I mean in the general sense, if organized labor was very clear about exactly where they stood and said, these are our principles, and the principles are laid out. Workers of the world unite. From that basis, we've got the Bill of Rights. This is what we support as workers, no matter what our differences are. We are united in supporting this. And we will support political parties that are come closest to what we believe in. And should they do that, that would be the correct role. At the same time, they would be creating not jobs, and as Professor Seepe mentions, because government can actually create jobs, as they did do throughout the Depression as well, but they can also engineer the right sort of macroeconomic policy that will allow for greater redistribution, greater growth, and more jobs. And if more jobs mean only 2 days a week for people with a decent pay and decent work, fine. We have to work out a new way for the new century, which is changing the nature of work right across the board.
All right. Thank you so much to you both for your time. Do appreciate it. It looks like there is still quite a lot of work that needs to be done in the space of labor movement. Let me thank Nina Benjamin in absentia. She was a part of this conversation and she's a project leader at Gender Equality Program. Terry Bell, a labor analyst, and Professor Sipho Seepe, a political analyst. Thank you so much to you all for your time.